Right, we now come to the urgent question. So, Secretary of State Victoria Atkins.
To ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer if she will make a statement on the changes to agricultural property relief and business property relief.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for asking this question. Happy New Year to her and to all members in the House. Mr Speaker, the reforms that were announced in December go further to protect more farms and businesses while maintaining the core principle that more valuable agricultural and business assets should not receive unlimited relief. The allowance for 100% rate of relief on agricultural property relief and business property relief will be increased from 1 million to 2.5 million when it is introduced in April, Mr Speaker. This means a couple will now be able to pass on up to 5 million of agricultural business assets tax-free between them, on top of the existing allowances such as the nil rate band. Taken together with the reform that was announced at the recent budget, widows and widowers will also benefit from up to 2.5 million of their spouse's allowance, even if their spouse passed away many years ago. Our changes further reduce the number of estates forecast to pay more inheritance tax, and they further reduce the liability for many of the remaining estates. Compared to Budget 2025, the number of estates claiming APR, including those also claiming BPR, that are affected by the reforms in the coming tax year is expected to halve from what would have been 375 to just 185 estates. That means around 85% of estates claiming agricultural property relief in 26-27 are forecast to pay no more inheritance tax on their estates under these changes. The Government, Mr Speaker, has announced these changes after listening carefully to feedback from the farming community and family businesses, and I am pleased that the National Farmers Union and others have welcomed these changes. Even after these reforms, the Government expects to raise around 300 million in 2029-30 from our changes to these tax reliefs. On this side, we are making the fair and responsible choices to support the farming community, with a record 11.8 billion investing in sustainable farming and food production over this Parliament, and to modernise our tax system for the future.
Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this first urgent question of 2026. And what a way to open the new year with yet another government U-turn. But where is the Chancellor of the Exchequer? This is her tax, her U-turn, and she should explain why she didn't announce this at the budget. Because over the past 14 months, farmers, rural communities and the Conservatives have campaigned relentlessly in and out of Westminster against these vindictive taxes. This U-turn acknowledges what farmers have been telling the government from day one. Ministers have got their maths badly wrong, and many more farms and family businesses will be broken up as a result of Labour's higher taxes. Does the Minister accept this? Why has the government U-turned? Has it got anything to do with the recent Labour backbench rebellion? Can the Minister tell the House how many family farms and non-farming family businesses will still have to pay this death tax? Are tenant farmers included, given that the now Chief Secretary admitted at the time that 14,000 tenant farmers were missed out of their original calculations? And can the Minister also confirm whether he signed the tax and information and impact note for this U-turn before the budget? This partial U-turn does not save every family farm and family business. Indeed, for many, this U-turn is simply too late, with record farm closures under this government and the great personal toll it has taken on many families. Given the pain, the anguish, the distress, and in some cases the sorrow that this cruel tax has caused families up and down the country, will the Minister now have the good grace to apologise on behalf of the government to farmers and family business owners?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government announced the change in December because we had continued to listen to both the representatives of family businesses and the representatives of the farming community. I note that the National Farmers Union and others have welcomed the change that has come forward, which will increase the threshold from £1 to £2.5 million. I think that is the right change to make, and I think it makes sure that we get the balance right. We're still raising £300 million from the very largest estates. And if members opposite would prefer not to raise that money and give £1 million tax cut to an estate worth £10 million, then that's their choice. That's not our choice. We think we've got to the right place on this policy, and that we strike the right balance, both raising revenue from those with the very largest estates, but also making sure that we have a higher threshold, which, if someone's in a couple, because of the changes that we announced at the budget, will mean that they will now be able to pass on up to £5 million. I didn't sign the tax information note for the change that was announced on 23rd of December before the budget. I can confirm that in the House. And on the numbers of those who are affected, as I said in my opening remarks, the number of estates affected who claim agricultural property relief, including those also claiming BPR, is expected to halve from 375 to 185, Mr. Speaker.
Jim Dickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year to you. And can I thank the Minister for his answer. I was pleased to meet NFU representatives for Dartford and for Kent in late 2024 and in January 2025, and I passed on the view to Treasury Ministers following those meetings that it was right for the government to close the inheritance tax loophole and stop the price of farmland being inflated by people purchasing that land to avoid inheritance tax, but the threshold should be set at a significantly higher level to reduce the risk of smaller family businesses being affected by these changes. Does the Minister agree that the reliefs are now fairer to family farms, but will still achieve their purpose of reducing tax sheltering and raising vital revenue for public services?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I do believe that we've got the balance right here. You know, it is worth noting that the top 4% of claims accounted for over half of the Exchequer cost of business property relief, and the top 7% of claims accounted for 40% of the total Exchequer cost of agricultural property relief. That's hundreds of millions of pounds, Mr. Speaker, in tax that was foregone, that will now be raised from these changes from the very largest estates. And I thank my honourable friend for his engagement on this issue over recent weeks and months.
Lizzi Cooper, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Happy New Year to you, to the House staff and to all members here. Mr. Speaker, this policy was a disaster from the get-go. It came with no warning, no consultation and no clue. We were the first party to point out the damage this was going to have to family farms, and we have repeatedly and clearly highlighted that it was going to fail to tackle the loopholes exploited by private equity companies, but it was going to hammer the family farm, damaging our food security in the process. The changes are welcome, but they do not touch the sides, and they are a clear admission by this government that they have got it badly wrong. There is now only one sensible course of action left, and it is to scrap this in its entirety. So will the government now do that? And if not, we Liberal Democrats will table amendments to the finance bill to bring it down. Will the government allow a free vote so that those on their own benches who want to vote against this measure are free to do so?
Mr. Speaker, I'm always interested in reading the amendments from the Liberal Democrats, and even though none of them will ever get passed in this House, and not least on this measure where we have got to the right position now. And I would just say to the honourable member that the position now is that the changes that will be in the finance bill will raise around £300 million. And it is, of course, a legitimate position to say that you do not wish to raise that revenue, and instead that you would borrow more money, or that you would cut public spending on services like our NHS. That is not our position. We think that this is a fair and a proportionate reform.
Jayne Kirkham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this as a sensible compromise and would like to point out that under Elms, the 800 million put into Elms in 23-24 will become £2 billion by 28-29, along with SFIs being reintroduced in April, the land use framework and the farming roadmap. Will the Minister agree with me that this Labour government is now well on track to raise food security and help our family farmers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her question and for her work on the Select Committee on this and many other important issues that affect rural communities up and down the country and in her constituency. It's a fantastic part of the world, and I'm sure I will be able to come and visit soon. And yes, she is right that the government is taking steps, for example, through our £11.8 billion fund to support sustainable farming and food production, and I look forward to working with ministers in other departments and across government to making sure that we can continue to support our rural and our farming communities.
Chair of the Deficit Select Committee, Alistair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this announcement, and I pay the warmest possible tribute to the farming unions and others whose tireless campaigning since the budget of 2024 has made this happen. These changes do make this policy better, but that is not the same thing as saying that they make it good. It is surely bizarre that in 2025 you can have two farms, both valued at £5 million, but one of them passes free of inheritance tax, whereas the other has an inheritance tax bill of £500,000. Surely the government now has to come forward, publish the impact assessment that they presumably have done on this, so that we can all see the difference that we have, the reasons for this change, so that we might have some confidence that they've got the figures right this time.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The figures that the government has published with this change and at previous budgets are drawn from actual claims and engagement with HMRC for both APR and BPR. And that analysis shows that before this change, it would have been 275 estates, up to 275 estates affected a year. And now that number is forecast to halve to around 185. That means around 85% of all estates claiming APR, some with BPR, will now not be paying any additional tax. So I do stand by those figures. We published them when we made the decision, and they are included in the letter, Mr. Speaker, that I and the Secretary of State have sent to all members. On the point the member raises around 2.5 million or 5 million, I think he's referring there to the fact that if you're on a couple, then you can get up to 5 million. If you're single, then it's 2.5. That is a long-standing position that means that the inheritance tax nil rate band and the residence nil rate band are only transferable between spouses and civil partners. Making any unused allowance transferable in the same way is consistent, Mr. Speaker, with that long-standing approach.
Lizzi Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Morecambe and Lunesdale very much welcome the changes to agricultural property relief and business property relief, which, as the Minister knows, I have raised repeatedly. The changes to relief mean that family farms will be protected, whilst large landowners who've bought agricultural land simply to avoid paying tax will no longer have that loophole. So does the Minister agree with me that these changes show that, firstly, the Labour government are listening to rural areas, listening to rural Labour MPs, and unlike the opposition, Mr. Speaker, is serious about proper policy development, not just headline chasing?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her question. And she is right that we on this side of the House are the true and better representatives of the rural community. There are over 150 MPs on this side of the House that represent rural and semi-rural constituencies. I believe, Mr. Speaker, there are as many MPs that represent rural constituencies alone as there are entirely on the blue side of the benches opposite.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, Chair of the PAC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year to you and your staff. Farmers in my constituency will welcome this change in the thresholds to APR and BPR. However, it took 14 months to achieve, and the rural communities do really feel discriminated against by some of the measures that this government are taking against them. So could I ask him to convey to his colleagues sitting on the Treasury front bench that not to enact any changes to shooting or trail hunting, because that will really damage and annoy the rural communities?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will be going ahead with the changes that were set out in our manifesto and that have been announced recently. I think that is the right thing for us to be doing.
Riddell-Carpenter.
Mr. Speaker, and happy New Year to you and the team. Can I start by thanking the Minister for working actively with rural colleagues and myself for the last 14 months, and for his department as well. And I know that in the many conversations that we've had, face-to-face and wider correspondence, we've set out a huge amount of the issues that are well known to this House. But really at the heart of it, and why so many of us were concerned, is the lack of profitability in farming. Now, the Baroness Batters report will go a huge way in addressing some of the systemic issues in farming. But will the Minister agree with me that we need to also tackle supermarkets and the unfair practices and address lots of the long-standing issues, and that the Treasury as a whole needs to be continuing to engage with rural MPs and making sure that we put further reforms in to support farming profitability?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for her work too on the Select Committee and the work that she does in representing rural communities like her own. My understanding, Mr. Speaker, is that ministers in the Environment Department and the government, we are looking at what more we can do to make sure that farmers receive a fair price for their products. Of course, we do support having a competitive supermarket and retail system in this country, Mr. Speaker, so that we can have low prices for consumers, but we do have to make sure that those prices are fair for those farmers and those communities who we rely on to produce good British produce up and down the country.
Sir Julian Smith.
Mr. Speaker, this policy has caused huge stress for rural communities across North Yorkshire. What discussions is he having inside government about other policies, such as the rates policy on public houses in rural areas, to make sure that this error is not made again?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm of course, continually, as the Tax Minister, which is why I'm here, to go to the point that was made earlier as to why I'm here at the dispatch box today, looking at what changes and improvements we can make to our tax system to continue to support both rural and urban constituencies and communities up and down the country. And if there are changes that he would like to see, he is, of course, very welcome to write to me on that or on any other matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've worked extensively with the NFU, the Welsh branch, and also with NFU generally, and in the UFU in Northern Ireland. And I have to say that these changes are very, very much welcome. Yeah. But I do want to say to the Minister and to the Farming Minister sitting next to him that it is very important that we have these conversations at every opportunity with Labour MPs and across the House, because it has damaged our farming communities. But I also will take no truck with the opposition, because I've been in opposition, I know what it's like, and they let our farmers down. We are now fixing this situation, and now we are getting to the heart of it and supporting our rural communities properly, and I welcome the changes, especially for my constituents in Gower.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her question and for her experience and expertise that she brings to the House as Chair of the Select Committee, and the work that she has done on this and other issues that is really very important. And yeah, you know, the changes that we have made now to this policy, I think, mean that it's now a fair and balanced policy that does protect more farms. As I've said, the number of estates that are expected to pay more tax will halve, Mr. Speaker. And now we can hopefully, on this side of the House and across government, continue to focus on the things that we can do to continue to support farming communities and our rural communities. For example, Mr. Speaker, the £11.8 billion of investment that we are putting in over the course of this Parliament.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our farming and rural communities in Cumbria and right across Britain should be utterly proud of themselves, because this U-turn is their victory, and I want to pay tribute to them. But the appalling emotional and economic damage to farmers of the last 14 months has been cruel and will have a lasting impact. So will he apologise to the farming community now for that last 14 months? And will he recognise that many hill farms in Cumbria will still be hit by this tax because they are worth more than £2.5 million, while their average incomes are less than the minimum wage? Doesn't this tax remain an attack on British farming and on food security?
Finished.
Mr. Speaker, One of the things that would have happened if the government hadn't made these changes in December last year is that members opposite would have been standing here asking us to make these changes. We are now coming forward with a revised position, which has the threshold increasing from £1 to £2.5 million, and yet members are criticising us for coming forward with that change. We think it's the right thing to do, and Mr. Speaker, we've made sure that we've made it in good time before the Finance Bill, which is where these changes will be voted into law later this year, Mr. Speaker. And I would say to the honourable member that, yes, there will be some estates who will continue to pay more as a result of these changes. They will be the very largest estates, but it is worth bearing in mind, Mr. Speaker, that those estates will also be paying significantly less now than before the change. If the estate's worth £2.5 million relative to the position a few months ago, that's a £300,000 reduction in their tax liability. If it's worth £5 million, that's a £600,000 reduction. These are significant reductions in the amount of tax that the very largest estates will have to pay. But we do think it is right and fair to continue with a reform that strikes the right balance between the need to raise more revenue and the need to make sure we're protecting smaller family farmers.
Sadiq Al-Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to wish you, constituents in North Somerset, House staff and honourable members a Happy New Year. I welcome the Government's decision to amend the thresholds for APR and BPR, as do rural communities in my constituency of North Somerset. I would also like to extend my thanks to those organisations who also campaigned for this outcome, such as the NFU. But this is only one part of a larger problem. For 50 years, our country has witnessed the gradual erosion of our rural communities' sustainability, our national food security and farm profitability. I look forward to 2026 being the year that the farming sector gets the wider change it needs for the new year to be a happy and profitable one.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will also take the chance to wish his constituents a happy new year too. The Batters Review that was published just a few weeks ago set out the steps that the ideas that this government can take forward to ensure that farming can be profitable and sustainable. And I know that ministers in DEFRA and across government will be continuing to work on those important objectives.
Sir John Whitting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I welcome this announcement, which directly contradicts what the Secretary of State told me and my right honourable friend on the day that the House rose for Christmas, is the Minister aware that there are still a significant number of my constituents who farm in the Dengie Peninsula and elsewhere who will face a significant inheritance tax bill which may prevent them passing on their farms to their children in the way that they inherited them originally? If the Minister is anxious about the scheme being used as a tax avoidance measure, will he reconsider the NFU's suggestion of a clawback mechanism where if a farm is sold within a certain period after inheritance, then the government can take back the exemption?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, we will not be considering the clawback proposals that have been put forward. Instead, the government has come forward with the change that was announced in December last year to increase the threshold from £1 to £2.5 million. And it is, of course, worth remembering that the tax rate paid above those higher thresholds is half the tax rate that anyone else who has sufficient assets would pay if they were liable for inheritance tax, and that any tax liability can be paid interest-free over 10 years. We think that on balance these changes will, yes, they will affect some of the very largest estates. The government's published the numbers based on the actual claims data from HMRC that estimates that fewer than 200 estates will be paying additional tax. But because of these changes, almost all of those estates that are paying some additional tax will be paying significantly less than otherwise, because we have listened to family businesses, because we have listened to farming communities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, clearly this is an issue of importance to the farming industry. It's also of importance to small firms in the steel and engineering sector in my constituency. Special Quality Alloys is a firm where their owner, Ben Birchall, wrote to me and said this firm had been in the family for many, many years and passed on from one generation to another. They were really concerned that the measure as initially proposed could lead to a breakup of that important firm, which has won the Queen's Award for Enterprise in the past, meaning it would either be sold off or broken up. So would my right honourable friend confirm that this measure will equally help those sorts of small businesses which are vital to the overall well-being of the steel and engineering sector in Sheffield?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and it has given me a chance to return to a question that the Shadow Secretary of State asked, but I didn't quite get to, you have to forgive me, which is to just record for the House that the number of estates who are only claiming business property relief is set to fall from 325 such estates to 220 a year as a result of these changes, increasing the threshold from 1 to 2.5 million. And I met with the representatives from Family Business UK, and I know that members on this side of the House have, as well as been having private conversations around APR, have been discussing with the government the proposals on BPR as well. And this uplift in the threshold will mean that family businesses that people do want to pass on will now have a lower tax rate, or in many cases now not have to pay the tax at all.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I find it interesting that the Minister is standing today to say that this is now the right policy. It's what the Government said on the 23rd of December, but it's not what they said on the 18th of December when we had DEFRA oral questions in this place on the day before we rose. But I've spoken to farmers who now will not be impacted by the tax, who've spent cash flow and hard-earned savings in taking financial advice to ameliorate this change. And things are not getting easier for farmers. Just this morning, one of my farmers got in touch to say that he was informed on New Year's Day that he's going to be facing a 3p per litre cut to his milk supply. So along with the Batters report, what assessment is the Government making of the ongoing financial impact on farmers, whether that be poor government policy or poor supply chain practices?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I am aware that earlier in the year, members opposite and in this House did ask us about these changes, and that we have come forward with a revised proposal with a higher threshold. I think that is the right thing to do. I think it shows that we have listened to the representations from the farming community and from the business community, as my honourable friend recently mentioned. And the Batters review that was published on the 18th of December last year has made a number of different recommendations, Mr Speaker, and we will be taking forward many of the proposals there to make sure we can support increased profitability for farmers and make sure that we can continue to work on important sustainability initiatives too.
John Whitby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was grateful to meet the Chancellor recently to highlight the impact that the proposed changes to APR and BPR would have had on farmers in Derbyshire Dales. And I would therefore like to thank the Minister and the Chancellor sincerely for listening to me and other members of the Labour Rural Research Group and for raising the tax-free allowance. Since the change was announced, over 100 farmers have written to me to say how pleased they are about this change, with one farmer stating, "This has been hanging over me all year, making me ill, and I can't believe the relief I'm feeling right now." I was therefore wondering if the Minister or the Chancellor would now like to take the opportunity to visit a farm in Derbyshire Dale so that they can see for themselves the positive difference that this change has made.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question and for his invitation. I will make sure to pass it on to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and it's one that I will consider carefully myself.
Sir Bernard Jayne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable gentleman referred a little while ago to the importance of manifesto commitments. Where in the manifesto did it say that there would be any restriction on inheritance taxes for farmers? In fact, wasn't it the case that ministers went round promising not to impose such a tax when they were in opposition, and they then did precisely the opposite? So when he's talking about manifesto commitments, can he just have a slightly less selective memory and also avoid misconstruing the position of the NFU that is still in favour of the abolition of this tax altogether? Tom Bradshaw is my constituent, and I hope he will send him his best wishes and congratulate him on exposing the hypocrisy of this government.
I had the pleasure of meeting Mr Bradshaw last year, and the NFU have welcomed the changes that the government put forward in their statements that they released when we announced it and around the turn of the year. And he asked about manifesto commitments, Mr. Speaker. We were very clear in our manifesto that we would return economic stability to this country, putting behind the chaos of Liz Truss, putting behind the chaos that the party opposite left us with. And part of that is about making sure that we don't continue to borrow excessive levels as they did, but bring borrowing down in every single... Borrowing is coming down in every single year of the next 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and making sure that we can raise revenue in a fair and sustainable way to fund our public services.
Horncastle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome these changes hugely, which I know have been met by with real relief by the farmers in my constituency of Aylesbury, and I'm grateful to those farmers who have fed in their perspectives to me over the last year and allowed me to pass those on to the Treasury. Can the Minister reassure me that, and my local farmers, that he will continue to listen and engage to our farming communities in this way, recognising the inherent value of farming, but also the great contribution that it makes to the economy and to our food security?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the conversations that I know that she has had with ministers on this and other issues in recent weeks and months. And yes, we will continue to do all we can to support farmers and the farming industry in this country. That's part of why we're working hard on trade deals to make sure we can improve access to markets for farmers here in the UK so they can export more of their produce overseas.
Dave Dougan.
Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to the Minister. He's back out again doing a sterling job of being a totally discredited Chancellor's human shield. He'll remember the finance bill that we debated just before Christmas, which took 3 hours in this place, and 2 hours of that was taken up with agricultural property relief, as I pointed out to him at the time. He wants us to believe that he's moved this policy into an acceptable position, but it is no such thing. This is a policy that the Labour Party expressly said they would not enact, and then they did it, and now they've made it slightly less bad. I and the NFUS in Scotland are firmly opposed to this in its entirety. So will he take a win for a hard-up government and pause this policy pending a proper analysis?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, we did discuss this at Treasury Questions, at the second reading of the Finance Bill. We'll have time, Mr. Speaker, to discuss it at the Committee of the whole House of the Finance Bill next week too. And I can see there are many more questions coming, so we may have many more hours today, Mr. Speaker, to discuss it as well. In the end, the position that the government has got to now is that we are going to be amending the Finance Bill to make this change, to increase the threshold from 1 to 2.5 million, and that will, we expect, and it will be confirmed by the OBR in the usual way at fiscal events, will raise £300 million, money that we can put into our public services rather than continue the chaos of previous years with additional borrowing. It is right to look in the round at fair and necessary tax changes that we can make on those with the broadest shoulders so that we can fund our public services adequately.
Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year. Can I pay tribute to Carlisle NFU and to my constituents who have raised this issue with me over the last 14 months? And can I thank the Minister and his colleagues for engaging constructively and listening to those representations? At a time when North Cumbrian farmers face land price increases as a result of both forestry firms snapping up large parcels of land, but also large landowners seeking to abuse the IHT system by hiding their wealth. This is an important step in balancing both the need to tackle that abuse and tackle rising land prices and raising the revenue that our village schools, our rural communities need to tackle crime and our local health services require. And does the Minister agree with me that this now achieves that balance that we need?
I thank my honourable friend for her question and for the strong representation that she has provided for rural constituents of hers and rural communities. And, Mr. Speaker, she makes a very important point. It is worth noting that this is a tax relief. And the tax relief, as it stood before the changes that the government have come forward to since the budget in 2024, meant that the top 7% of claims for agricultural property relief accounted for 40% of the Exchequer cost of the relief, And that was £219 million, Mr Speaker, in tax that was foregone. Revenue now that, by and large, this government will be raising from the very largest estates to help fund our public services, Mr Speaker, in a sustainable way, something that the opposition were never able to do because of their chaotic management of the economy and the public finances.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The government has heard from these benches time and again about the impact the family farm tax has had on food security, the risk to countryside stewardship and our environment, and the economic viability of farms, but also, crucially, on the impact for farmers' mental health. So my question to the Minister is simple. On behalf of farmers across Chester South and Eddisbury, why did this decision take so long?
Mr Speaker, the government wanted to make sure that the changes that we are legislating for in the finance bill in the coming weeks came forward before the finance bill was passed. We have continued to listen. We have continued to listen to farming communities, to family businesses, and I do now think the changes that we have come forward with, Mr Speaker, increasing the threshold from 1 to 2.5 million, coupled with the changes that we announced at the budget earlier, well, I was going to say earlier this year, but just last year, Mr Speaker, will mean that a couple can pass on up to £5 million of agricultural or business assets tax-free. We on this side of the House think that that is a fair and a proportionate way to raise revenue from some of the very largest estates in the country.
Bengals.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. South Norfolk is home to 400 farms, and I want to also put on record to thank Will, Nick, David and Deborah, some of my farmers that have supported me hand in glove over the last 14 months of representations to the Minister, which I welcome these changes. But the biggest threat to family farming within South Norfolk right now is biosecurity risks. Can I urge the Treasury to pay this special attention to this, especially avian influenza and African swine fever, so we can protect the family farm going forward?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the strong representation that he has provided for his constituents since he was elected in 2024 and for raising a very important issue, one that I'm sure that government ministers in DEFRA are very alive to and will continue conversations with members on.
Davis.
To call this a property relief, Mr Speaker, and what is an absolutely new tax. But will he tell us, will the agricultural property tax threshold rise in line with agricultural land prices?
Mr Speaker, the government has set the thresholds for tax policies over the period of the OBR's forecast, and it wouldn't be right for me to comment on the changes that may or may not happen after that. May I just say to the member opposite that, you know, throughout the whole time that Margaret Thatcher was in power, we didn't have a system like the one that we have today. So he isn't quite right to say that this relief, has always been there. It was not there when the political hero of many of the members opposite was in power.
Andrew Pex.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and Happy New Year to you and all of your team. I welcome the Minister's comments, and I'd like to thank DEFRA and Treasury Ministers for engaging with farmers and NFU members in my constituency and listening to the views they have. Mr Speaker, you will know that farming has had a terrible decade. It's much bigger than 14 months, with rural services cut, with farming budgets unspent, with failed Brexit plans and with trade deals that sold British farmers out. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that with the changes we've made to APR, with the findings of the Batters Review and with the funding that this government is putting in place, we are now in place to turn a corner on that terrible decade for British farming?
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker. I do agree with my honourable friend that was a very powerful question and a very powerful contribution, Mr. Speaker. He makes some very important points around the fact that the trade deals that were negotiated under the previous governments undermined British farming, the fact that there wasn't the consistency of investment and support for farmers up and down the country. And what do rural communities think about this? At the last general election, they turfed out hundreds of Conservative rural MPs and put in over 150 Labour MPs to represent rural and semi-rural constituencies. This side of the House now is the mainstream voice of rural communities up and down this country.
Ellen Morgan.
Mr. Speaker, the psychological impact of the last 14 months has been profound in rural places like North Shropshire. Every primary school visit I've done in the last 14 months, I've been asked by a child as young as 7 or 8 to confirm that I oppose the family farm tax because it's having a devastating impact on their family at home. And the uncertainty has had a devastating impact on related businesses like agricultural machinery suppliers as well. And it will continue to have an impact of making business owners deliberately keep their business small so that they don't have to pay inheritance tax because they can't sell off part of that farm. It won't be viable without it. So why is this government continuing with this daft policy of restricting growth in rural areas?
Mr. Speaker, the government wants to support growth and investment in rural communities. That's why we're putting in £11.8 billion of support over the course of this Parliament. That's why we're making sure that across the board we improve our economy and our economic fortunes as a country after the chaos of the last 14 years. We've had 6 interest rates cuts in a row. We've had borrowing costs coming down. We've had inflation falling faster than people forecast, and it's now forecast to continue to fall. All of those long-term changes to improve our economic outlook will support businesses in rural communities and communities across the country.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I put on record my thanks to farmers like Nick, Matt, Debbie, James and Graham in my constituency in the Northumberland branch of the NFU, who I was in contact with regularly and who welcomed the Minister to my constituency to hear firsthand about the potential impact of the policy had it not been changed. Can I also urge him to impress upon colleagues the importance of buying British wherever possible? The best way to improve farm profitability is to make sure that as much of the public sector food procurement is done from British farms, and to ensure that farmland is not lost, that to replace potential food-producing land, more food-producing land is not needs to be cut out of forests elsewhere in the world.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for inviting me to his constituency last year, shortly after I was made a minister on the 1st of September, I believe it was. It was a very productive and useful visit, and I want to thank the farmers and the community that I met when I came to that lovely cafe and had some lovely tea and cake with you and those farmers. That was a really helpful conversation for me, and I'm thankful to him and the representations that he has made on behalf of his constituents over many months. And, Mr. Speaker, on the point he makes around procurement and making sure we can continue support farmers and farmer communities, that's something that I want to work with him on, and I know that ministers across government, particularly in the Environment Department, will continue to do that in the months and years ahead so we can turn the page on the chaos that we had under the previous government.
Gavin Williamson. Sir Gavin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't adequately put into words the fear, the concern, the stress that farmers in my constituency and right across the country have felt as a result of a policy that was announced at the government's first budget. And now that same fear is also being felt in rural pubs up and down the country in terms of the changes to business rates. So will the Minister firstly apologise to those farmers for that fear, stress and cost that he's put them all through? And will he also indicate to many publicans across Staffordshire that they're going to do a U-turn on the business rate so they don't close rural pubs?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has been listening to rural communities, to the farming representatives and to the representatives of family businesses, and that's why, after listening, we've come forward with these changes that we think now strike the right balance between the necessary impulse to make sure that we can have a fair and sustainable tax system, and also continue to protect those smaller businesses and farms. And I'm sure we'll have many more chances in this place to continue to discuss business rates.
Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This is very welcome news, and many farmers in my constituency will be delighted. Can I firstly acknowledge the Minister's engagement on this subject and the many conversations he's had with myself and other Labour Party representatives from rural communities. Can I also pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Suffolk Coastal, for her role as chair of the Labour Rural Research Group and the advocacy for hundreds of farmers across the country. I think it's fair to say that the changes to APR are part of a long list of concerns for farmers in this country, concerns which were increased over 14 years of Conservative government, where we saw a huge decline of farming. Can I invite the Minister to join me in a New Year's resolution to work with Treasury colleagues to do more and all that we can possibly do to support farming in this country?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question and his continued reminder of the fact that the previous government and previous Conservative Prime Ministers were roundly rejected by the country at the last general election. People in rural communities and communities up and down the country, Mr. Speaker, voted for change for the better with this Labour government, and for a government that will continue to represent and support farming communities up and down the country. And let me thank him on his recent appointment. Let me praise him on his recent appointment to the DEFRA Select Committee too, where I know that he will provide an invaluable contribution in his continued representation of rural communities.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, and can I wish you and the staff a Happy New Year as well. Regardless of the reason for the change in policy, whether it's simply the fear of the electoral consequences of breaking electoral promises and manifesto promises to farmers, or a belated recognition of the importance of the farming industry to feeding the nation in an increasingly unstable world, I welcome these changes. But I would point out to the Minister, despite his assurances, 25% of farmers in Northern Ireland will still fall over the threshold which he has announced, and that will have an impact on family farms because of the cost of land, etc. Will he accept that since he's seen the disaster of the policy, that the answer is to abolish it altogether?
No, I do not accept that, Mr. Speaker. That is not the answer.
Law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his considered engagement with rural Labour MPs such as myself from the get-go on this. And I also thank farmers, at least in my part of Cornwall, for their dignified engagement in what I know has been a difficult time. So does the Minister agree with me that where we've landed now is a much better balance that actually, in relative terms, favours small family farms compared to industrial concerns, institutional investors, and actually those looking to use agricultural property as a means of avoiding tax?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question and his continued engagement on this and a whole range of issues that affect rural communities in Cornwall. He is a strong advocate for his constituents, and we have now come forward with a change in the APR and BPR thresholds to make sure, as he says, that we can protect those smaller family farms.
I urge colleagues to keep their questions short and for the answers to be on point. Alistair Cairns.
Mr. Speaker, this U-turn comes too late for too many, and it's extraordinary to hear Labour MPs saying that their farmers are delighted. Mine is sick with relief after 14 months. Now, at the liaison committee, the Prime Minister accepted that he knew that some farmers had planned to take their lives or had already, and yet it still took him well over a week to decide that rural lives matter. So what was it that suddenly changed after 14 months, where he decided that our farmers decided to be stood by and not to be questioning whether or not they were going to be here for next Christmas?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the course of recent months, the government, since I've been in the government from September, ministers from the Environment Department and from the Treasury have continued to engage with farming communities and with business communities. It's, of course, worth remembering, and it has been raised by some in the Chamber today, that this change affects on business property relief and not just on agricultural property relief. And as a result of that listening and that engagement, we have come forward with the change in time for the Finance Bill.
President.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This month marks 12 months since I first called on the Government to raise the APR threshold. I strongly welcome the decision to do so and thank NFU Cymru and the FUW for their tireless campaigning. Can the Minister assure me that the Government will continue to listen to rural communities like mine?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes, I can reassure my honourable friend that we will continue to listen and engage with the over 150 Labour MPs that represent rural and semi-rural constituencies on this side of the House.
Dyke.
Speaker, it really should not have taken over a year for the pleas of thousands of farmers to be heard and the government to finally concede their mistake and change the disastrous family farm tax. But it's clear that they still simply don't understand the industry. Many farmers in Glastonbury and Somerton are run by multi-generational family partnerships rather than by married couples. These businesses will not benefit from the combined spousal allowance of up to £5 million. So will the Chancellor finally give up and completely leave farmers alone to get on with what they do best and produce food for the nation?
We think it's the right thing to do to continue to raise around £300 million from this policy, Madam Deputy Speaker, so that we can alongside the other changes that the government is making, raise revenue in a fair and sustainable way to fund our public services.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I refer members to my register of interest. And I thank the Minister for his engagement on this issue over recent months. It has made a real difference. Given his engagement on this matter and rural issues, I wonder whether he would agree with me that this country needs a rural strategy, and that's something that this government should be delivering.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This government has our farming roadmap. We've also set out, we've also published the Batters Review. Many of the proposals and the recommendations in there we will be taking forward so that we can continue to support profitability and sustainability for farmers and our farming communities.
Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a good new year to you and the staff. The past 14 months have been hell for the farmers of the Freet and Galloway, and the Minister's made it clear he will not apologise for that. But will he stop fantasising like the Wealth-Finder General about the money that he can take out of agriculture and instead concentrate on helping British farmers put British food on British tables?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and we do need to continue to do all we can, Madam Deputy Speaker, to support British farming so we can have more British produce on our shelves and to make sure that countries overseas can have more British produce too. That's why we've been working hard on our trade deals to secure more access for British farmers to markets overseas as well.
Whereas, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thoroughly welcome the increase in the threshold, and I'd like to remind the Minister that in terms of farming profitability, it was my Conservative predecessor and former DEFRA Secretary who described their Australia deal as not actually a very good deal for the UK. The Conservatives sold out and undercut our farmers with trade deals to New Zealand, where we couldn't export to them, but they could export to us. And these deals were cheered on by Reform. Will the Minister confirm that this Labour government will never sign such incompetent and damaging deals, and we won't take lectures on farming profitability from the Conservatives or Reform?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he gives me the chance, Madam Deputy Speaker, to quote Michael Gove, who admitted that the previous government had let down British farmers. He said, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I can confirm that we negotiated poorly with Australia and New Zealand, but particularly with Australia in defence of our farmers. He admits that the last government made mistakes when it comes to failing farmers on trade. I wonder whether the opposition will do so too.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This partial U-turn on the dreadful family farm tax is partially welcomed by farmers in Boston and Skegness. But where is the Chancellor to come and admit the error of her ways? And what I would say is that jobs have been lost, investment has been slashed, and tragically, Madam Deputy Speaker, lives have been lost by this grief tax. So will the Minister, at the third time of asking, apologise to the farming community?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister with responsibility for tax, I'm here answering questions about tax, and I'm happy to continue to do so. The change that the government has come forward with, that was announced last month, that we will be legislating for in the finance bill, does increase the threshold from 1 to 2.5 million because we have listened to farmers and their representatives, and because we have listened to family businesses too. Madam Deputy Speaker, we think that is the right thing to do, and we think it strikes the right balance.
Dame Neil Griffiths.
Very much. Well, I'd like to thank my honourable friends in both DEFRA and the Treasury for listening to farming colleagues, including the NFU, Cymru and FUW, and making this very welcome change to the proposals for the agricultural property relief, meaning that many more Welsh farms will not pay any additional inheritance tax. But he will note the previous Conservative government signed very detrimental trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand, which within 10 years will lead to limitless meat import quotas. So will he look very carefully at what could now be done in order to help those Welsh family farms maintain their farming tradition? Because at the moment they're going to be open to very severe competition. So everything needs to be done to look at what can be done to help them.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And yes, the previous government did negotiate very poorly when it came to trade deals. When the Conservatives negotiate, Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain loses. Whereas on this side of the House, we have negotiated 4 new trade deals now, significant trade deals, that will continue to help making sure that British businesses, both farming businesses but businesses of all sorts, can access more markets more easily. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that's the right thing to do for the long-term growth and productivity.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the partial U-turn, and when I met a number of farmers on Boxing Day, all 400 of them that were very concerned that the next phase of this government's relationship with rural Britain will be a consultation on banning trail hunting. When in fact I think what the Minister could do from this experience is go back to the Treasury, ask his officials to put together a team to work very closely with their counterparts in DEFRA to absolutely ensure that the farmers' obligation and indeed their true intent to produce food and be good stewards of the environment can be combined, and to ensure that never again in the course of this Parliament will such measures be undertaken as they were last year.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. He mentions the issue of trail hunting. That was in our manifesto. It's part of our animal welfare strategy to continue with some important changes there, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think it's the right thing to do for governing parties to make progress on the commitments that they made when they stood before the country.
One of us. Changes to its plans on inheritance tax on farms and family businesses. The current system as is does not work. And whilst we do need a tax regime that protects genuinely family farms but doesn't let the super-rich dodge tax by buying up land, and actually many of the farmers in my constituency have the same concerns around that, they've also been very, very clear to me that the £1 million threshold was too low and it was going to have a really significant detrimental impact on farming in my constituency. I, along with many other Labour MPs in rural seats, have made that case directly to ministers, and I'm very pleased to see that the government is raising that threshold to £2.5 million, because it will make a huge difference for farmers in my constituency. What I'm very interested in here, though, is what steps the government will be taking and what steps the Minister can take with colleagues to ensure that profitability is at the forefront of our work with farmers, particularly on things like... I'll leave that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Batters Review focused closely on this, and we'll be looking at the proposals and the recommendations there and making sure that we can do all we can as a government, within the constraints that we have, to continue to focus on improving farming profitability.
New Year tip. Look at your question, cross out most of it, then continue. And Sabine.
Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of Freeman, Somerset, we have not just a lot of farmers, but we have huge numbers of other businesses and livelihoods that rely on those farms. And that whole rural economy has been really negatively impacted by the last 14 months. Would the Minister undertake not just to apologise to communities like mine, but to undertake that the government will genuinely start listening to rural communities, because at the moment they don't feel listened to or understood by or even cared for by this government?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will continue to listen to rural communities and to farming communities to make sure that we can support them as they seek to grow and invest in their businesses, to improve and support the communities that they are part of. And because we've been listening to the representatives of farming communities and of family businesses, we have come forward with the changes that we think do strike the right balance.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome this as a sensible compromise and thank the members of the Devon NFU for their work talking to me both here and in Exeter. I want to talk about the government increasing support for nature-friendly farming through environmental land management schemes. It's going up from 800 million a year to 2 billion a year over the coming years. And can the government confirm this government is taking the necessary steps to make sure that we can sustainably and in an environmentally friendly way produce the food we need in this country?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for the engagement that we have had on this and on other issues that affect his constituency and the rural aspects of his constituency, which I know it contains some. He raises a very important point, and we need to continue to work in partnership with farmers, in partnership with their representatives and trade bodies to make sure we can support sustainable food production in the UK. That's why we're investing £11.8 billion of support over this Parliament, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to thank all of the South Shropshire farmers and businesses for a tireless campaign where they've been continually told by the government that they've been wrong, and they are now proved right. They are still telling me this tax is wrong. The family farm tax isn't right. Will the Minister apologise for all the heartache, pain and suffering that he has caused South Shropshire farmers and businesses and scrap this tax completely?
Minister.
We will not be scrapping this tax completely. We have laid an amendment that will be in that the House can have the chance to debate next week in the Committee of the Whole House of the Finance Bill. We think that the proposals that we are now planning to implement will both raise £300 million in a fair way and will protect smaller family farms.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last month I visited Portnailin Farm in my West Dunbartonshire constituency. I received a very warm and courteous welcome from husband and wife farmers David and Frida and their son Chris. The Scott Parks run their family farm, and they were keen that I hear and see at first hand the challenges they face to ensure their next generation can continue to farm at Portnailin, and I listened to their request that we review the original proposals. Does the Minister agree that 85% of all farming estates will now be protected from inheritance tax, but importantly maintaining the original principle that tax avoiders should not use land to avoid tax at the expense of hard-working family farmers such as the Scott Parks?
I thank my honourable friend for his question, and he makes an important point, Madam Deputy Speaker. If someone has agricultural or business assets that are worth £2.5 million, for example, Madam Deputy Speaker, they'll now pay £300,000 less inheritance tax than they otherwise would have done. If they're worth £5 million, they'll be paying £600,000 less than they otherwise would have done before the changes that we announced last month. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the challenge of the proposals from the opposition parties is that they would propose, for example, to provide £1 million tax cut to an estate worth £10 million. And their priority is clearly the very largest estates in this country, and giving them tax cuts worth millions or maybe even tens of millions of pounds, rather than raising revenue in a fair way to fund our public services.
Dr. Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Farmers in North Herefordshire welcome this change, as do I, but there are still huge problems with this policy. It doesn't even fix the tax loophole for people who buy up land to avoid tax, and it's created huge amounts of economic damage and heartache in farming communities. So can I ask the Minister, first of all, why did it take more than a year to listen to farmers' voices? And secondly, will the Treasury please engage brain before announcing policy in future, listen to and work with farming communities?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We will, of course, continue to engage with and listen to and work with farming communities in the policies that we're putting forward. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's now interesting to see and hear that the Green Party do not support at least one wealth tax.
Sean Woodcock.
Thank you very much, Madam
Speaker, and can I thank farmers in my constituency, Banbury and Tripper Norton, for engaging constructively with me on this issue, well, the vast majority of them anyway, and say that I know that they will welcome these changes, as they will welcome the record £1.8 billion investment into sustainable farming and food production provided by this government. I know that they are also, however, concerned by trade deals having been left high and dry by the previous government. So can the Minister confirm that this government will protect farmers, not sell them down the river, as was the experience previously?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Having grown up in rural West Oxfordshire myself, I know the importance of farming and rural communities in the fantastic county of Oxfordshire, which now, thankfully, Madam Deputy Speaker, doesn't have a single Conservative MP, and long may that continue. And it is a very good thing, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we have strong Labour representatives in North Oxford, in North Oxfordshire, who are continuing to fight the good fight for their communities.
Thank you very much. This partial U-turn to the family farm tax is undoubtedly welcome. But does the Minister understand the hell that he has put farmers through, not just in my constituency, but across the United Kingdom during the last 14 months? And he should do the right thing and scrap this dreadful, dreadful tax.
We will not be going ahead with his proposal of scrapping this change in time.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I put on record my thanks to those farmers in my constituency, Harlow, who engaged really productively over this issue. In particular, I want to pay tribute to Richard and Jack Scantlebury of Great Canfield. Can the Minister talk further about how the record investment of £11.8 billion into sustainable farming can help benefit farmers in my constituency of Harlow, like Jack and Richard?
Thank my honourable friend for his question. He's right that we're putting in that amount. That's over the course of this Parliament to support innovation, to support agri-tech, to support all of the things that farming businesses can and should do to be able to invest and grow their businesses and to support their communities. That's the right thing to do, and it's turning the page on the chaos and the underfunding that we had in previous years.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister said that this reversal of plans to introduce inheritance tax on many farming families has happened, quote, after listening carefully to feedback from the farming community. This news just before Christmas was indeed a massive relief. But given that the farming community did not say anything in December that it had not been saying for the previous 13 months, will the government listen properly in future?
The government will, yes, make sure we do continue to listen, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Hinchcliffe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for listening and acting on the concerns that I and many other Labour MPs raised alongside our farming constituents. Now that a happier compromise has been found on inheritance tax, the issue remains securing a profitable future for nature-friendly farming in our country. So can the Minister provide an update on what actions the Treasury is taking to support the swift rollout of our manifesto commitment for 50% of food bought by the public sector to be locally produced?
I cannot update my honourable friend at the House at this moment, but I would be happy to write to him on that point.
Dr Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the government said it's been listening carefully. Well, it had 14 months and 4 votes to listen to this side and the farming community. So a question is, what changed the government's mind? And number 2, who made that decision? Was it the DEFRA Secretary, the Prime Minister or the Chancellor? And how long did they take to persuade the other person to make that right decision?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Government decisions are made collectively, and yes, the government has listened to farming communities, to farming businesses, and to the representatives of family businesses who would have also been affected by the change, by the £1 million threshold in BPR, which is the same as the APR threshold.
Jonathan Davies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it was very welcome news to hear that the government has revisited the issues around business property relief, which will help family businesses in my constituency, as well as agricultural property relief, which means up to £5 million can be passed on by a qualifying couple. But it was also right that the government considered this area as a whole, because too many people, including famous folk off the telly, had bought these properties with a view to insulating themselves against tax. So can the Minister assure me that we will take steps to support our farming community by not selling them down the river with dodgy trade deals like we saw with Australia and New Zealand under the previous government, that we work closely with our European export partners, that we will ensure that the SFIs, the subsidies, get to where they need and that they'll be spent in a timely way. They went unspent under the previous government.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. He's right to mention the disastrous trade deals that happened under the previous government, and I thank him for giving me the chance to mention the trade deals that we have implemented that have been seeking to support businesses across the country to be able to access more markets. And I hope that with our continued engagement with the European Union, we can continue to do that closer to home too.
Ben Lake.
Minister to clarify whether the Treasury subscribes to the general commitment the Government has previously made to ensure that all policy making considers the impact of such decisions on rural areas. And if the Treasury does subscribe to this rural proofing commitment, could he please elaborate how he will ensure that it is abided by in future so as to ensure that rural communities such as those in Cardiff and Preseli are not subjected to yet another ordeal such as we just received?
I can reassure the honourable member that I and ministers will continue to think through the impacts on rural communities and all communities when we come forward with changes to tax or other policy. And because we have done that, that's why we've come forward with the change that we announced just before Christmas, and we will be making that change in the finance bill in the coming weeks.
Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Family farms and family businesses across the world of Kent have been through appalling emotional turmoil, trying to work out how to avoid leaving their children unaffordable, crippling tax bills when they die. But many of them have also, and they're operating with razor-thin margins and small profits, been forced to shell out thousands of pounds on professional services advice on this issue, which will now be worthless. What does the Minister have to say to them?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question. To those families and to people, with farms and businesses that would have maybe been affected by the lower threshold, but will now be affected less or not at all by the higher threshold, I would say that we have listened. I would say that over recent months, we have heard the concerns that have been raised, and that's why we've raised the threshold from £1 million to £2.5 million. That means that if you're a couple, you can pass on up to £5 million of agricultural and business assets tax-free on inheritance. And I would just briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, remind the House that above that threshold, the tax rate is half the rate that everyone else pays, 20% rather than 40%, and that those who pay it will have 10 years to pay so interest-free if they need to.
Cameron Thomas.
Speaker, farmers are amongst the most robust members of society, and yet since autumn 2024, several have spoken candidly with me of the mental health impact of the family farm tax in an industry which suffers a rate of suicide 4 times the national average. The changes to the government's family farm tax are welcome, but will the government take this opportunity to apologise to Gloucestershire farmers for 14 months of torment?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have listened. We have made sure, after the engagement that we've had with farmers across the country, with their representatives and with the representatives of family businesses, that we've come forward with a policy proposal that we now think on this side of the House is balanced, that raises £300 million. That raises £300 million from the very largest estates and does so in a fair way that means that we can continue to fund our public services sustainably.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 14 months is a long time for farmers to have a sort of Damocles over their heads, and many still do because this is only a partial U-turn in the policy. The Minister has said many, many times today that he is and has been listening to farmers. Yep. But will it take another 14 months before he hears them and scraps this policy altogether?
We heard what farmers were saying, and that's why we've come forward with the changes that we've announced last month.
Jim McAllister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Ulster Farmers Union and the Young Farmers Clubs have also made many representations here in regards to the damage that this would have to Northern Ireland farms specifically, but there's one specific point I want to ask him on. He has mentioned a number of times about the alliance being passed between couples and civil partnerships. Example 2 of his own government paper says that 2 people, such as siblings who jointly own a farm, will be able to pass on the 5.65 million allowance. If there's a father and daughter, uncle, aunt, niece and nephew in a partnership, can they pass on that allowance as well, saying he's the tax minister?
They can each pass it on up to £2.5 million to whoever they would choose to pass it on to, but in the inheritance tax system more broadly, it is the case, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the various bans and allowances are only fully transferable between spouses, and this is consistent with that policy. But it would be the case that if a farm was owned, say, by a brother and a sister, that the brother could pass it up to £2.5 million to whomever he wished, and the sister could pass up to £2.5 million to whomever she wished. That's what the example 2 that he is referring to gets at.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And Worcestershire's farmers have had to endure 14 months of sleepless nights over this policy before this partial U-turn. The Minister has hinted at the dispatch box today that he appreciates that he's also going to have to U-turn on business property rates because of the transitional relief coming off too quickly. So can he commit to the House that he will do that U-turn in less than 14 months?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we're having a discussion today about agricultural property relief and business property relief, and I'm sure we'll have many occasions in the coming weeks and months to continue to discuss the changes that the government have made on business rates to support businesses through the transition, because of course there has been a significant increase in their rateable values coming out of the pandemic. And I would just say to those members opposite that the changes to the rateable values and the valuation methodology was signed off under Conservative ministers, and we have made sure that we're providing support. For example, business rates will be capped at 15% for many pubs this year.
Lisa Smart.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is wholly unacceptable that farming families in places like Mellor and High Lane have had over a year of uncertainty and anguish since the government first announced these tax hikes. The government got it wrong, and these changes that we're talking about today are welcome. But could the Minister commit to consulting farming communities before making any future changes to taxes affecting farming communities? Because that was a step in the process that was missed. Could have saved them 14 months of anguish had they got it right last time.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Because I signed them off, I can tell the Honourable Member that there are many consultations on tax changes that we publish alongside fiscal events, and if she wishes to engage with the consultation on electric vehicle taxation, she could do. If she wishes to engage with the consultation on the high-value council tax surcharge that we publish shortly, she could do. There are many consultations that the government published on tax changes, and on those where formal consultations are not published, which isn't universal, then we continue to engage in detail with those who are affected, which is what we've done with this change here.
Wendy Morton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister, despite many opportunities, simply refuses to apologise. So I'd like to ask him if he can explain to farmers, including mine in my constituency, who've been forced to live with fear and uncertainty for over 14 months, despite warnings from so many organisations this tax would do real harm. What support is his department going to give to those families who've shelled out money for advice, and families where his government has done irrevocable damage to their businesses?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been asked that question already by a member opposite, but I'm happy to give a similar answer, which is that to those families, what I can say is that we have been listening carefully to the representations that have been made about the level of the threshold as it was originally set at the budget in 2024, and we've now come forward with a change that will mean that the threshold will be at £2.5 million rather than £1 million, and coupled with the changes that were announced at the budget 2025, that will now be transferable between spouses, allowing those families to have up to £5 million tax-free passed on.
Claire Voden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a Happy New Year. I've stood here alongside my colleagues for 14 months asking various ministers to reconsider this policy, and farming organisations up and down the country have campaigned relentlessly for 14 months. Why did it take the government so long to listen to them? And wouldn't it be nice to hear somebody be able to stand up at the dispatch box and just say, we're sorry we got this wrong, and we commit now to consult with the farming community and the rural community on any further changes to reliefs and taxation that will affect them.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have come forward with a change to this policy after listening to farmers, after listening to farming communities and to the representations that have been made. We think that this is the right change. We can have a chance to debate it again at the Committee of the Whole House and the Finance Bill next week, where the amendment that has been laid will be voted on. In the end, members opposite who wish for us not to go ahead with this change at all should come forward with ideas for how they would raise £300 million from those who have the very largest estates in this country. We think it's right to raise revenue from those with the very broadest shoulders, and that's what this change now will allow us to do.
Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After months of sleepless nights, fear and uncertainty, this partial U-turn is a victory for farmers, and I'd like to pay tribute to farmers across the country, but particularly in my Bromsgrove and the Villages constituency. Despite the U-turn, this should still be scrapped. I'd like to ask the Minister what he can say to farmers regarding incentives. Where is the incentive for a farm to invest in very expensive capital equipment if it may tip them over the threshold, at which point the family farm tax becomes liable?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just to be clear, this change only comes in for farms that are, or for farming or business estates that are worth more than £2.5 million or £5 million if they're in a couple. There are still significant incentives to grow and invest in people's businesses. The tax rate is half the rate that it is for everyone else when they pay inheritance tax if they have sufficient assets to get over the threshold, which is worth noting, Madam Deputy Speaker, only around the very largest 10% of estates in the country pay any inheritance tax at all.
Ryan Matthew.
Madam Deputy Speaker, on behalf of the family farmers of Melksham and Devizes, can I point out that farm prices differ across the UK, and that raising that level of APR to, say, a flat 6 million, whether it belongs to a couple or an individual farmer, would be a great help in terms of assuring farmers of the future, freeing them from worry, and assuring their future growing our food. Thank you.
We think it's right to have the same level across the country. That's the same in other parts of our tax system. It wouldn't be right to have different tax thresholds for different small parts of the country, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Jim Alistair.
Thank you. I certainly welcome the increase in the threshold as far as it goes and commend the campaigning farmers who secured it. In explaining it today, the Minister said the government has got the balance right. But of course, those are the very words that this Minister used at this dispatch box and Westminster Hall in defending the £1 million threshold. And each time he did it, he caused torment and anxiety to farming families. Is the Minister sorry for the anxiety caused needlessly to those farmers?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, the number of estates that will be affected by this change will fall by half as a result of the changes that the government announced late last year after listening to the representations from various business and farming communities. We think that, that will now mean, Madam Deputy Speaker, that rather than 285, it will be closer to 175 estates a year affected. That's around 85% of estates won't pay any additional inheritance tax, and those that do, the vast majority of those that do, will be paying significantly less now than they would have done before the change that we announced late last year.
Manuela Patagala.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the revised threshold changes, a first step in the right direction, and I thank the local farming community in South Warwickshire and Warwickshire NFU for the tireless campaign. However, farmers across my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon tell me that the changes to agricultural property relief have created many months of uncertainty, freezing investment and growth, and succession planning. Why did the Chancellor and her team announce changes to the agricultural property relief last year without meaningful consultation with family farmers first?
I thank the honourable member for welcoming the changes that the government has come forward with. We did continue to engage with representatives from the farming community. I believe the Prime Minister mentioned how he'd been in conversation with Mr Bradshaw from the NFU. And of course, as ministers across government, we have listened to and engaged with the farming community. I myself went up to Hexham, the honourable member has left for, I'm sure, other important businesses, to meet with farmers in his constituency, and all of those different forms of engagement have proved really very valuable indeed.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Farmers in Waveney Valley are relieved at this change, but they're also frustrated that the government hasn't been listening about the underlying causes of why it's so difficult for farmers to make even a living wage to put food on our table. It's been obvious from the outset that the government needed to review the threshold. So it's baffling that it took 14 months to do so. And my question to the Minister is, does he recognise the emotional and financial cost of this 14-month delay?
I do recognise that, that there are many estates that would have been affected by the lower threshold who now will, rather than having to pay the additional inheritance tax, will not be paying any inheritance tax at all. We've moved hundreds of estates out of paying additional inheritance tax. And we've also reduced the tax liabilities for those larger estates too, because we have listened.
Ian Rooms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my rural constituents in North Devon are relieved that the government has partly seen sense on this issue. Given the track record of U-turns from this government, when I meet with a group of local farmers next week, what reassurance can I give them that the government will not change course on this policy again in the near future?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Finance Bill will be making its way through the House in the coming weeks, and once the Finance Bill is law, Madam Deputy Speaker, that will be the change that will be coming forward. And I should say to him, if he meets his farmers on the 7th of April this year, the change will have already been in place.
Edward Morello.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and a Happy New Year. I want to pay tribute to the farmers of West Dorset who have never stopped campaigning against this family farm tax, and especially those hardy ones that have repeatedly driven their tractors up to London to let their views known. This is just the latest in numerous assaults by this government against our farming communities. And so I wonder if the Minister will take this opportunity to put on the record that this government will not agree to President Trump's demands as part of the US trade deal that we accept more food imports at lower food standards.
Yeah. Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we will always fight for the interests of British businesses and British farmers in the deals that we strike with countries across the world.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and Happy New Year. Constituents in Newbury, where I'm proud to represent, have really felt the burden in the last 14 months of this unfair family farm tax. I've hosted farmers up here in Parliament. I've invited all parliamentarians to come and meet them, and I'm proud that members, predominantly from opposition benches, have made that effort, and that the government have actually started to listen. But I have family farms in my constituency that are still going to have to pay £600,000. They will have to sell off their farms in order to pay those tax bills. So when the government table their amendment, will they table an assessment of those remaining farms and whether they're likely to be needed to be sold off to fit Labour's tax bills?
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The amendment has already been laid before the House. It sets out the changes that the government is making. And in the letter that all members will have received, we set out our estimates of the fact that the number of estates we think will be affected will halve. And around 85% of farming estates, those claiming APR, sometimes with BPR, will not be paying any additional inheritance tax at all as a result of these changes, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Final question, Claire Young.
Madam Deputy Speaker, looking at farm sizes and land values locally, I fear family farms will still be paying family farm tax. What evidence is there that £2.5 million realistically reflects the value of a typical family farm in a constituency with higher land values like Thornbury and Yate?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I thank all members on all sides of the House for their engagement on this important issue today. we have set the threshold at £2.5 million so for a single person, £5 million for a couple as a result of the changes that were announced at Budget 2025. And we think that that threshold is right and fair. It means that the number of estates that will be affected, the farming estates will be affected, will fall by half, and the vast majority will not pay any additional inheritance tax at all, Madam Deputy Speaker.
That is the end of the urgent question. Point of order, Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier, the Minister said that this agricultural property relief was not available under Margaret Thatcher. In fact, it was Margaret Thatcher's government that brought it in under the Inheritance Acts of 1984, and it was then subsequently increased to 100% under John Major. So how might I go about getting the Minister to correct the record?
The Right Honourable Lady, due to her experience, will know that the Chair is not responsible for the content of members, nor the Ministers, if only we were, but she has no doubt got her point on the record, and we do not wish to continue the debate. Thank you. We are now getting ready for the next urgent question. Would Ministers like to swap over?